Clear of our names.
I'm Amber. Hi.
I'm Roxanne.
Hi there, Roxanne.
I'm Terry. I am the facilitator for this group. I'm the reference librarian here. I'm Lisa.
Lisa, hello.
Hi.
I'm Anne.
Anne.
I am Lou.
Lou.
My name is Joyce.
Joyce, hello, Joyce.
Copy. My name is Anne also.
Anne, another Anne.
And Kim is our technology wizard.
We're trying.
And go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Well, you might not have guessed, but we're English.
What a surprise.
I sound a lot more English than Richard, because Richard did live in the United States for 6 years as a child.
Yeah, I grew up partly in Washington, D.C., but mostly in England and also a bit in Scotland. So I've got 3 different kinds of accents, which is either a hybrid accent or a mongrel accent, if you want to be rude about it.
Well, I haven't seemed to have lost my English accent. Sorry about that, but I'll do my best to slur a bit. But no, Richard and I were educated in England and in Scotland. I grew up in an old English pub. My father was a publican, as they called them there, and Richard was educated in a very old school in Bath, in Somerset.
I think the school was founded in 1453, I think, which is so. And as far as I was concerned, the desks and the teachers are dated from that age, but it was a very, very old school. So we both grew up with a lot of history around us, and then we met in Scotland, and then we emigrated to Canada.
Yeah, we went to Aberdeen University in Scotland, which is one of Britain's 5 oldest universities. And so, as Richard said, we were sort of steeped in history, and then we chucked all that overboard and went to live in Canada after we graduated. And it was there that we both started with jobs in the publishing industry. And Richard worked for Maclean Hunter, one of the major publishing companies there, and I worked for the other one called Southern Business Publications. And then later on, as Richard was saying, we set up our own small business in Canada.
And then we moved it back to the UK, and it had some operations in the UK and also in the US. And then we sold the business a few years back. And we then were in a position where we could decide either to live in the UK or the US, and we decided to come down on the side of the US. So we've been living in Boulder for the last 15 or so years.
Mm-hmm. And that's really when we started writing books. We'd obviously been involved in publishing all our lives. We were journalists, we were writers, we were editors. And Richard, in his 20s, had written a number of novels which were published in Canada. I don't know if you want to talk about those in that dim and distant past.
Well, they were probably read by about 4 people each. I'm not sure.
Oh.
But well, no, the readership wasn't too bad. But you couldn't possibly make a living writing novels in Canada. And it used to take me 2 years to write a book, but I could write a magazine article in about 2 weeks. And typically I would be paid the same amount for the magazine article after 2 weeks' work as I was paid for writing a book after 2 years' work. And so it was pretty obvious that I had to go the way of writing magazine articles rather than writing books.
But we weren't put off by this. We were lucky enough to sell our small publishing business when we were in our 50s, and which gave us enough freedom and financial support that we could actually start writing books together. And since then, we have written 5 books together, 4 of them non-fiction, and then the one you've been reading, In a Town Called Paradox, is the first novel that we've written together, and we're now working on the 6th. So that's a very brief outline of how we got to where we are now.
Thank you. So I thought, let's take a few minutes, and if you have questions for them, let's ask those, and then we'll talk about the book more. Is that fine with you?
Yeah,
Of
sure.
course, yes.
Okay. So does anybody have a question they'd like to start with? Okay, I'll start. Jump right. So how do you divide up the writing?
Well,
That's it.
well, a lot of people assume that two people write a book. We sit at the same desk, or we write other alternating words or something like that. But it doesn't actually work like that. I mean, we outline a scene that we're going to write, because the book is, although hopefully it's sort of one long coherent whole, it does consist of about 150, 160 separate scenes. So you outline one of those, and then somebody will do a rough of it, and then it goes backwards and forwards between us, and until we're both reasonably happy with the result. And we do have a few discussions about it, but so far we haven't had any serious arguments.
Well, we're quite lucky that we were both come from the publishing industry, and we're used to having our copy handed over to another editor or whatever, who says whatever you thought was brilliant, in fact, isn't brilliant at all, and you really ought to do the whole thing again. And so we don't have a vanity. You have to leave your vanity behind a bit when you're co-writing, or indeed when you're writing, really. But you get a better feedback as when you're writing with a co-writer. And so you leave your vanity behind and look at the future of the book and what you're trying to achieve, and that gets over most of the hurdles. We don't have really arguments. We may have heated discussions, but it's usually with a fairly strict objective in mind, is to get the text right.
And you still are friends after you criticize?
Yeah, no, we're still talking to each other. Yeah, so that's always a good sign.
We're working on another book, so that must mean something.
Certainly, yeah, it's true.
I mean, to some extent, we do have compatible skills, or we think we have. I mean, we're not exactly the same. So, but we were both exactly the same and had the same skill set, then one of us would probably be redundant, and the other one could write the book on his or her own. I don't like to speculate which one of us might be redundant at that, but we're not that close together, but we're not so far apart that we can't communicate. So it's a sort of an overlap, and so our joint skills are better than either the individual skills that either one of us could bring to the project. So hopefully the end result is a book that between us is better than the one either one of us could write on his or her own.
I do think, upon reflection, actually, because a number of book clubs we've spoken to have asked this very question: how do two people write a book? I do actually now think probably it takes us longer than it would take a single author to write a book, because of all the toing and froing. I mean, initially we just thought, well, we're just really, really slow, because we have taken a lot. I mean, the Town Called Paradox took what, 4 years?
Yeah, something like that.
And our other books have taken roughly the same length of time. Initially we thought it'll only take a year, 2 years, but they've ended up being 4-year efforts. And I do think a lot of this is because of the two people writing and the interplay between us. So, it does take a bit longer, but hopefully the results are a bit better.
Anybody else have a question?
Well,
Okay, Lisa.
I thought you guys were native Utahns, because I don't know too many people outside of Utah that would really write about Utah. So why did you guys choose to write about Southern Utah in the 1950s and 60s?
Well, first of all, we love Utah.
Oh, okay.
We've traveled there. We've traveled to Utah an awful lot in the time that we've lived in Colorado, and we've never ceased to be impressed, by the state. I mean, we've traveled. We do know the Salt Lake City area a bit, but mainly we've traveled in southern Utah, and so we were in love with the scenery, really. Coming from the British Isles, where everything's small and green and not huge and monstrous and beautiful red rock. It really had a big impact on us.
And then
Go ahead.
after we'd been there several times, obviously we came across the fact that the movies were made in the 1950s and 60s there, and still are, in fact, a lot of them made. And so it just struck us as being an interesting setting, really, for a story, because obviously there was some kind of conflict, which is what you look for in stories, between the fairly liberal people from Hollywood coming in the 1950s and 60s, and the more small town Utah, more conservative people, and you wondered how these two communities would get along. And they get along. In fact, they get along very well, actually. But that struck us as an interesting sort of scenario, and we built up the story from there. So books can start in the writer's head almost anywhere, but this one really started with the setting.
Because really, to make a good story, a good book, you have to have conflict. It's not that interesting if everyone's getting along great, you know. We as writers don't have to take sides, and you know, if there's no conflict, and you as readers don't have to look at a conflict and think, well, what would I do if I were in this situation? So that's what Utah offered us, and we were obviously stimulated in developing the book too through the old movie sets we saw when we were traveling around Utah as well. And I guess that hankers, you know, back to the non-fiction aspect of the work we've done. We did like the authenticity of the setting, and that there was a true history actually behind the story.
Was there a specific town in southern Utah that you had in mind as you wrote the story, or was it kind of more of a conglomeration of multiple towns?
Well, it was multiple ones, really. I mean, I think we do mention Moab once or twice, and we mentioned Blanding, I think, but only because that's where somebody went. So it's just generally set somewhere in southeast Utah in canyon country. But we didn't want to pin it down to a specific town, because then you have to be authentic to that particular town. And of course, what happened in our story never actually happened in any particular town. So we made it a fictional town.
But we did conduct a lot of first-hand research in the Moab area with residents of Moab, some of whom had actually were, you know, fairly old people now who had worked with Hollywood when Hollywood was filming in Utah in the very early days, and they'd worked as scouts and drivers for some of the stars, and there were a couple of people who'd been stuntmen, like, you know, Cal was in the book. So we did do some first-hand research, you know, with people who'd experienced Hollywood in Utah.
Well, and I looked up Paradox, and it sounds like there's a valley in Colorado that's kind of close to Utah, maybe not far from where you are, I don't know. Did you use part of that? Is that where the name kind of came from? Or was the name for the meaning?
No, the name was initially, it was really inspired by the rock formations that, the Paradox rock formations that have formed many things like Arches National Park. So that's where it really came from. But it's also kind of an interesting word. Richard always.
Well, yeah, I think if you give a town a name, or it's a lost opportunity if you just give it a neutral name that doesn't mean anything. So we wanted a word that had some relevance to Southeast, or a name that had some relevance to Southeast Utah, which is what Paradox did. But it also has this other meaning, which is slightly intriguing, I think. It's just a sort of an intriguing word, because you're not quite sure what a paradox is, and it might hold something else that perhaps is beyond what is obvious. So we thought it was a good word or a good name to use. But the fact that Paradox in Colorado exists, that was coincidence as much as anything, and it probably created some confusion in the minds of some people who really know the area very well. But of course, not many people do know Paradox, Colorado, because it's a very small valley.
Yeah.
So you're insulting a reader.
No, sorry. Right, everybody knows Paradox, Colorado, but no, we just we put that on one side, and so it's not really linked to Paradox in Colorado. No.
But I should say that the title went through many phases and choices before it arrived at in a town called Paradox. So you know, that wasn't the only one that was in contention.
Good name.
It is a good name.
And, and El Dorado. I mean, I was thinking about the paradox of the story. You know, if you want to make money, it's not going to be in the real things. It's going to be in the imaginary or the film industry. And El Dorado is a place of imagination and gold. I thought those were great names for the two places.
Well, no, that's where El Dorado came in. Yeah, it was in the book. It's selected by the mayor to give the impression to Hollywood studios that, in fact, if they come to his town, you know, they are in fact going to get rich with some easy money. So yeah, it played on that, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and ranching in that area is hard. People would want that easy money.
Oh, yeah, I mean, Hollywood's arrival saved the economy of many small towns in southern Utah, many ranching communities.
Yes.
Because the movie people rented the horses, the people were used as extras. The movie people very generously gave football teams, school football teams, uniforms. They contributed an awful lot to the community financially. So
And for them, it was easy and cheaper than Hollywood.
sorry.
So it was much less money for them than being in Hollywood
Oh, yes.
to create a movie. I mean, you could go to those small towns and $10 buys a lot more.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it paid for a lot of people's educations and refrigerators and cars.
Exactly.
Well, what do you think about, we'll go to the questions and please speak just part of the circle, okay? Add your thoughts as we go. Sound good? Okay, so let's talk about some of the characters. Did you have a favorite? Corn. And how do you say it?
Well, we say Corin, but you, I think, say Corinne.
Yeah, I would say Corinne, but he didn't have an E on the end.
Yeah.
So Corin.
Yeah.
And you got it. Why did you like her so well, man?
It seemed to be the most normal.
Oh.
No, I just liked her. I liked her heart. I liked,
Anybody else?
I liked Jessie and Jessie.
You like Jessie, did you?
Yes, I did.
That's, yeah, you're the first one. You're the first one who liked Jessie.
Yeah, I think like Jessie.
Yes, I was gonna say, who is a lot like Jessie?
I think a lot like Jessie. I mean, she had a lot of wisdom, but she didn't push it onto anybody. She let them learn, which is the way she got it, I'm sure.
What do you want? This was one of the questions that you directed to us actually in your question sheet, but I'll ask back to you. What do you then, if you like Jessie, how do you feel about the way she brought up Corin and what she hid from Corin?
Well,
It was a
It was a
time.
time.
And particularly in Utah, it was a time. She would have been branded for life.
Yeah.
So allowing her to go somewhere else and be with people who were going to grow to love her was a better choice. Would be really hard as a mom to do that, but way better for the child.
Yeah.
It just went awry because she came back.
What do you mean?
I mean, when her mother died, or the adopted mother,
Oh.
then she came back, and then you have to, I'm sure for Jessie that created a dilemma. Like, how do I tell her that I'm really her mom?
Jessie fought to get her back though.
Yeah,
Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah,
an
it
accident.
wasn't an
Yeah.
accident. Jessie fought.
well, of course, but yeah, it just put her in a hard situation then.
You don't think that Jessie hid the fact that Corin was her child, because had she told her, Corin might have thought less of her.
Well, and Corin would have, could she keep that a secret? She might have inadvertently said that in the town and then all would be lost. I just was mad at her, because I like Jessie too, but I was pretty mad at her about the commitment order, the involuntary commitment order, choosing for Corin what she thought was best, and I was mad at her that she cut off the communication with her father. I think there could have been some way
Yes, I did.
that she could have worked that out. You don't think so?
I didn't like that either.
Yeah,
Communication.
yeah. That just that poor Gene, because he seemed like such a good dad.
Yeah,
In fact, the reason Corin loved the ranch was because of her uncle or her dad.
Yeah.
Loving
We
her
can't-
dad.
we can't hear-
Because he really instilled that into her.
Well, they can talk.
Yeah, we can't hear you guys too clearly. It's there's a wind, sort of echoey wind all the time, but anyway, we'll try.
It was because of Jean that she learned to love animals, which in turn helped her to love the ranch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Did you hear that?
about Jean, yes, and the animals, yes, that's how, yeah, she could
Yeah, we're
work.
just gonna,
He's your teacher voice.
we'll have to be careful to not talk over each other for one thing, just talk one at a time. So, Any other? I loved art. I loved art.
Yeah.
What a sweetheart. And I loved how he handled going into that boarding school's brutal in England. They seem so brutal.
Well, they're a bit dispassionate, I think.
Mhm.
You know, they're not there to mother the children, you know, they're there to bring them up with a degree of independence. And the child, I think, usually is often feeling a bit rejected anyway. So I don't think, you know, they help the self-esteem of a lot of their pupils, really. They vary from.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. But I loved how he handled the toad and then the jam sandwich with the ants. Just ate it, and then he was one of them. I thought that was pretty smart. Anybody else have a favorite character or more to say about the characters? Okay. Did you have a character that you didn't like?
Oh, yeah.
There were so many to choose from.
Yeah.
Anybody want to say anything about one? This isn't on here, but I'm just doing it with number one. A character that you especially
I did
wanted
like the
to share.
sheriff. I hated the sheriff.
Yeah.
I mean, how many lives did he destroy because of his own prejudice and hate?
So obviously you guys did a lot of research because a lot of these themes are things that happened in that time period, but may not happen now. Well, I'd like to think
You'd
they
hope.
aren't happening.
You hope they
Yes.
don't have it now.
I hope they're not, but you know, like there just was so much on the side of the law. If they didn't like someone or they wanted to protect someone or someone got raped, they chose how they would deal with it. And it wasn't in a very kind way.
Right.
This is one of the things about writing in a historical setting is that you have to research what happened then, and that actually can be quite tricky. And we had to, you know, rely on quite a lot of sources, you know, including some oral histories in the Utah library system to get some genuine facts. It does complicate things. You know, many of the scenes that were set wouldn't happen like this now, you know. So.
Well, you would hope. I've always told my children they have to be careful in small towns.
Well, I got to where I was kind of feeling sympathetic to Cal because he was raised a certain way and that's all he knew. And so I'm sure the sheriff was the same way, raised in that harsh way, prejudiced against women, prejudiced against the Native Americans. So do you have compassion for him, for the way he was raised? No. Okay.
No.
Gotcha.
Well, but they didn't ever go anywhere to learn anything else.
No, they didn't.
So it wasn't, I mean, yes, it was their fault that they were like that, but they didn't have any education or experience to show them there was something else out there.
Cal did because he interacted with the people from Hollywood.
But he
And
didn't
then
go
they
anywhere.
had the outsiders coming in, so I
Yeah,
mean, they brought their
Right.
ideas with them. And
Kind
their
of, but I don't
opinions.
think they shared those.
I don't think it,
What
I
do you
don't
think,
think it
Nan?
was close.
I think Cal has some stuff. I think he has some goodness in him. Well, better than his father and
Better than his father.
uncle.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I thought you
And
did a
everything else.
fantastic job of making that horrible house with the deer skins on the floor. Oh, I just, that was a good description of that horrible house, I thought. Just get out of there.
I'm pretty sure I visited people who had houses like that.
Well, from a writer's point of view, it's actually often more fun to write about bad characters. It depends on your own personality, perhaps, I don't know, but you can, they are often more interesting because they're sort of an edge, you know, they're not always nice about things and they can be quite mean and nasty, and it's quite fun to write about it. And as a result, even though they're not necessarily nice people, you can, as a writer, you end up liking them quite a lot because you enjoy their company when you're writing them.
Well, but I should add to that, if Richard's early books were about really nasty people who committed horrible crimes.
Oh, they were. Not true.
So let's talk about, I mean, we know about the childhood of 5 of them that I could remember. And some of them had pretty hard childhoods. How did that affect who they became? You want to talk, I've got Corinne and Ark and Cal and Dottie and Yiska. Did anybody want to say anything about how their childhood made them who they were? Did they rise above it? What did you think? Amber, you haven't said anything. Do you want to say a word or two? You don't have.
Not on this one, but on another.
Okay.
Yeah.
Roxanne, I interrupted you.
Yeah, I don't know, not yet, I'll take a pass.
Well, when I was a teenager, we had I don't know what they called it, but we had a girl from Blanding come and live at our home and go to our high school. And it was during this time of the government taking kids out, but this happened to be the LDS church. And we had her in our home and she hated it. And my dad hadn't asked me about it and I wasn't crazy about it. And she stayed about 3 months, but it was a horrible fit. I mean, she was pulled away from her home and everything was so strange. And we were supposed to be thrown together and be best friends, I guess. And neither of us had a thing in common. And it was a hard thing. And I really felt for those Navajos that got pulled to Brigham City, to the school in Brigham City and where else, to get their hair cut off, get a new name, not allowed to speak their language. I don't know. I just really
My
felt
husband had a friend growing up who, he was pulled off the Navajo reservation, and raised just, it's out in Murray area in Salt Lake City. They were the best of friends growing up. But it reminds me of that story too. He was pulled off the reservation to live with a white family up in Utah.
well, and they didn't really have a choice. They got taken. It
Yeah.
wasn't like the family could choose. So Amber, we're gonna
We
say,
had a better situation in Richfield. They had a school, a dormitory. And they would go to school, but they would live in a dormitory. I hate to say this, I just loved them. They came to my house and helped me clean and made tacos for me and burritos but that seemed to work, but they were eventually sent back. And that's where they
after the
needed
school
to
year,
be.
they went back for the summer, right? Yeah.
I think one of the difficulties is that the Native Americans ended up with not a foot in either camp.
Yes.
You know, they were lost to their homelands and they weren't accepted, you know, by the nation that was trying to anglicize them, if you like. And also, I was quite surprised learning about this, how recently the Indian schools continued to exist.
Yes, I know, yeah.
Or perhaps I'm just old, but it doesn't seem.
No, and truly like a horrible part of American culture. But really, you know, like it was something that really happened, and you honestly created a book that was so engaging. I actually, the night that we got the book, I went home and started reading, and I read until 4 o'clock in the morning.
Hooray!
So you nailed it, but you dealt with some really difficult topics in a way that didn't make you hate the book, which is a great skill.
Well, we're very glad to hear that.
Good. That's good, because we like writing about issues, you know, not necessarily directly, but through the characters that we write about.
There were some really hard issues, things we don't even have answers for today, like when Ark wanted to die. Of course he did. You know, he wanted to be out of the situation he was in, and it was so great that Yiska could help him, you know, and make that transition occur. And we don't have a good answer for that now.
I think perhaps because you know, a lot of people think that death is truly awful in the end, whereas in fact for Ark, it wasn't truly death, it was a continuation of life, and it would have been a better life.
Yes. And I loved the end when they land on the moon and they're like, they think they're the first, but it was really art. And I loved that kind of conclusion to the story.
Yes. No, I thought we were quite satisfied with that.
I'd
Yeah.
like to see a second book that kind of continues it. I'd like to know what happens. Is it Yiska? Yiska and Corin, just find out what happened to him after all of this. You know, did he make it back home to the reservation where his people were? Did she continue to stay on the ranch, and did she make it successful after everything had happened there? I even want to find out what happened with Dottie, because how such a devastating thing happened to her when she's just on the brink of realizing her dreams and getting out of there.
I was really mad at you guys when Dottie got raped.
Yes.
Oh,
It was like, finally, she can do it, and she has such a hard childhood with her father, and you could see how it was affecting her, and so she did all those dysfunctional things, and finally she gets to go to Hollywood and she gets raped. And I thought, oh my goodness, she's fallen off the cliff. It's just, I thought you did a really good job. I call them your ominous foreshadowings.
Oh, right.
Book. So there were three main ones I thought. The one was she and her father, Gene, her uncle, I guess, had helped with the bull at the zoo, and the father says, Gene says, it's worth millions, 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 and she says it was a refrain that would haunt me for the rest of my life. So you know something's going to go badly with the bull. And then at her wedding, she says, it was happily ever after, but that only happens in fairy tales or in the movies. So you know something's gonna happen in their marriage. And then the last one was, and I'm sure there were a lot more. When Ark's in school, he learns about them going to the pole and they're getting stuck there, and the one gentleman is holding them back, and he says, I'm going to go outside, and he goes and allows himself to die out there, and they never find him. And they say, you stepped off the trail and got out of the way. And so you know that's going to be Ark's philosophy. I've got to step off the trail and out of the way. And so I thought you did a fabulous job on those foreshadowings.
well, thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, you do want to foreshadow every now and then in order to keep the story rolling along, but you don't want to do it in such a way that the reader is given a hint before anything happens. And you can irritate the reader, yeah, as Miriam says, if you have too many of those things, because it's too much promise and not enough delivery.
Yeah.
But, no, I'm glad that you could identify them and you found them intriguing. That's always good to know.
Well, it makes the bad things, it adds to the shock value. It adds to the emotion of it, because you kind of have this inkling that it's coming, I think. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so go ahead, Ann.
I don't know if I dare see this, but it's a book I wouldn't let any of my kids to read. But yet it is. If you would have just left out, like, for instance, what did her sitting on her dad's lap, dressed up like a woman, sucking on her nipples? What did that, how did that add to this beautiful story you had written?
What do you think, Ann?
Well, I was disgusted by it.
Don't you think it affected how she felt about men? And
I
how
know,
she
but
felt
do you
about
have
men?
to, I was.
You would like that to have been done differently.
I would have liked that to have been written different. I mean, to come to that point without it being so right there.
Why did you have a transvestite instead of just like physical abuse, or I'm sorry, that was a horrible thing to say, instead of abuse? What made you decide that?
Well, it's very difficult to strike a different note sometimes in books. I mean, people like you have read quite a lot, and you've seen and read an awful lot of things, and you've been through life and experienced and heard of a lot of things. And so you do want to put in some things that are actually shocking, that it was meant to shock, and it was meant to shock in a different way, so that people would feel more sympathy towards Dottie and her situation. So it was actually intended to shock a little bit.
Does that help?
And it's fascinating. My parents grew up in small towns in central Utah. And all of these people lived in their towns. I mean, there just is always a wide variety of people who live different ways. That's why I was so sure I went in a house with deer skins on the floor. Because I've been a lot of places with my parents when I was young, and there were lots of different kinds of people who lived there. It's just that in a small town like that, you're more close and more privy to what happens. So everyone's secrets. In our town here, nobody knows or cares.
Mm-hmm.
I think it just adds to that ambiance of a small town where you know everyone's story, which also makes Jesse's story so much more unique because people don't know.
Don't know her secret.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But they wonder. I mean,
Yes, they do. They did, and they wonder about her.
Tuck always wondered, what are you praying for all the time? What forgiveness are you looking for? What did you do that was so bad?
Yeah. And just even her lifestyle. Why are you here? Why aren't you married? Why aren't you all of the whole gambit of questions that people wonder about people who aren't like themselves.
Did you have any other thoughts about small towns? Because it was a great portrayal of a small town. Yeah. And what did you see were some of the pros and cons? Were there some pros of living in a town called Paradox?
Well, like when they first got the bull, like people from the other ranch would come and help them, because it took 3 men to handle the bull, and they, people would come and help them. It wasn't something Jesse could do or Corin, like these men came and helped him for the day.
So maybe the
helping
people in
each
the
other.
town had to stick together to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And Jessie's neighbours, they helped her dig the water tower, put up the tower, and Jessie took cakes into the old lady in town. There was quite a sense of community there.
Yes, yeah. I agree, and I think that's a real component of small towns.
Good. And people in cities try and recreate it, but you never quite can, because there's always this dispersal of people all the time, and you just get diluted by the rest of the population.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've been picking the questions, and I didn't mean to. Does somebody have one that intrigued them that they want to pick? Or something else that you just wanted to talk about? It doesn't have to be one of my silly questions.
Do you think they would have handled things any differently if it had been someone other than Dottie who had been raped? I mean, if it was somebody in the town,
No.
I mean, I think with the Hollywood stars, there probably would have been a separate law. They probably would have investigated, especially with a well-known actress.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if it was, I think if it was any other woman in the town, it probably would have been met with the same opinion. Well, he said it was consensual, so therefore it is.
But they always took the man's word.
Yep.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Women didn't have, I mean, they didn't have any
So I wonder how much
word.
of it was, that there were almost two separate sets of laws and in that town, because I mean, like they hid the fact about what was going on with the stars, but it would have been a regular town person, they would have named the person in the report. So it's kind of interesting how you have these two sets of laws and how they were enforced.
I think that happened too.
Yeah.
But I think what you were trying to portray, if I can get it, because at first you had Dottie going around, stuffing her boobs, laying on top of the cars, presenting herself like she's out there, you know, doing things that she really wasn't.
Yeah.
So they picked her because she acted like somebody that wanted that. But in real life, she didn't. And so those cops from that just automatically said, hey, this girl's out there flipping her, you know, fronting her way or whatever you want to say it. Is that what you tried to say?
I think they would have, if Corinne had been there, they would have done that to her or Jesse. I think it was
Oh, you
just,
don't think
it was just an
because of that?
opportunity
No.
that they took it.
Not in the 50s and the 60s.
Oh,
Do you think it was more of appearance that helped their background?
No, I really think it was like, you took a man's word over a woman's, always. And we're barely outside of that now. Yeah, I was gonna say, if ever we are, yeah.
But you were gonna make another comment about it?
Well, did you think that at all, or did I take that wrong?
Are you meaning,
That Dottie was.
Dottie's background, did that play
Again,
into
where
it?
you had her, you know,
being
going
sexy.
around, being sexy or whatever you want to call it, laying on cars and attracting all the boys. Yet she wasn't that way at all. That led up to them thinking, oh, well, she's easy, but yes, she really wasn't in the end.
Remember,
She was a virgin.
I think you
Corin
made a
had those two
paradox
instances.
there, right? That was one of your
That was a
paradoxes.
paradox.
No, because Corin had those two incidences when she was 16, 17 of the casting couch. First,
Yes.
that jelly guy, and then one, the director. So I think it was just, there's a woman, we have the opportunity, we're just gonna take it.
Okay.
But I think your background that you're saying of her acting the way she did foreshadowed how they were gonna treat her.
Yeah.
You kind of knew that.
Yeah,
that
I
was-
know they don't believe women.
Yeah.
I'd be advised,
That
keep your
was
knees
hard.
together and all will be fine. You did well on that.
I did too.
I saw a brochure and a slide presentation at UV. What's the one in Provo? The
UVU?
Yeah, they had this presentation they gave to all the boys, and it was about saying no. And they compared it to a cup of tea. If the person says they want a cup of tea, okay, but if they change their mind later and they don't want the cup of tea, they don't want it. If they've said it 3 times, yes, I will, and then they say no, they don't want it. It was really cute and clever, but talking about no actually means no. I thought that one of the most chilling things you wrote was what the sheriff said. Well, if men took no for no, civilization would end. And there would be no more. Because it showed that darn sheriff what he was like, right?
Yes.
But I think that was a feeling. Sex was there for the taking, and if you didn't take it, civilization would end because the women weren't going to give it to you.
Oh, my gosh.
Don't you feel like that? I mean, that's what he said, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Convoluted male logic.
So that was a pretty powerful statement. Amber, did you have one you wanted to work on? Because I know you were going to give some wisdom at one point.
Oh, I don't know. I just thought it was the whole book, like really digging deep into the characters and seeing like their motives and why they did what they did was just, I was very surprised at the end with Jessie, but I didn't feel, I mean, I felt upset that she signed the order, but I didn't really feel mad that she kept the truth because I felt like, what else would she do? And I felt like her motives were to keep Corin safe, that she, in her heart, she really wasn't being selfish. She was trying to do what was the best for her. I don't know. It was good. There's a lot of really,
There was a
like,
lot.
well, I like how you said, like, there were a lot of really hard themes, and I don't usually do really well with hard themes. Like, books that are really heavy are sort of hard for me. I read a lot of middle grade books. Middle grade is like what I most read, but it was true. Like, I still enjoyed it. I still liked it. It made me think about things, and that didn't make me, I don't know. I still liked it.
And it was brilliant writing because you didn't feel like the hard topics didn't feel really scratchy and bad.
Yeah.
They were part of the story
Thought-provoking.
and very
Yeah.
thought-provoking, but at the same time, really well done.
Yeah.
I particularly loved when Ark came with Corinne to dinner and Jesse and he were fighting about scriptures. That was brilliant. I loved that discourse because you could see that happening in people. It was great.
Well, I think, but it surprised me what Corinne said. Don't fight your anger at your parents with my aunt. And I was thinking more it was science, that he was proving science. And then I thought, oh, yeah, he was fighting against his parents as he had that conversation. So that was really insightful.
It was
I
insightful.
thought.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about.
Yeah, it was a bit of both, as Richard said, yeah.
Right, right. So it always, when we have questions, we say, what did the author think? Or what was the author showing here? And now we can ask you. So there were some pretty negative things about religion. Like the absurd comment that the preacher in England made about you just have to have a shared belief. It doesn't matter if it's true. You just need something to hold you together. That's my most expensive quote because I was copying it in my copy machine and I pulled it out of the copy machine and it ripped the page out of the book. So now I get to buy the book. But I thought that the quote was so good.
Yeah.
So there was that one, and then there was the one about Jessie that religion had sucked the hope out of her, the joy. But had it really, was it religion that did that, or was it what religion taught her about she'd sinned and she had no chance for going to hell? What do you think? Okay, let's go back. When they're going and Ark's gonna take the seeds and Jessie comes barreling up there to shoot, with the gun, because she doesn't want her daughter to go to hell. I mean, isn't that what you got out of that? I'm already going to hell. I don't want you to go to hell. I mean, I just thought that was so sad if that's what religion teaches. You know, if it doesn't teach that you can repent or whatever your religion says and become clean, but for her to say, I don't have a chance, but I'm not going to let you not have a chance. So what was your feeling about her charging up there with the gun? Any thoughts?
No, like as a mother, you also have that really protective instinct. Like I would protect my kids from doing something like that. Only I can't shoot a gun very well.
You'd come charging in with a knife? Is that what you're doing?
No, I would need the seeds.
Any other?
I would need pharmaceuticals.
Well, was it just about religion or was it also the repercussions? too?
I think it was, to me, I read it as
Good point.
repercussions.
Yeah, because I mean, everyone kept pointing out, do you really want to end up, if you think you're in a prison now, you will end up in a real one if you do this.
Yeah.
It's true.
And you know, it was so heart-rending when Corinne realizes that Iska had really gathered those seeds for himself. He was in his own prison and he had gathered them for him, but he shared them with Ark. And that was just such a tender moment.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got all these different views on, this is back to religion, because there was a lot about religion in the book. You've got Dottie saying, you can't live like this, you know, with Ark. And you've got Cal and Jesse saying, you've got to go put him away, and her thinking, I've got to take care of this person that I love. And was it their spiritual underpinnings that was helping them decide that? Or what did you think? As Corinne was getting all these different kinds of advice that contradicted each other.
Cal's is very personal.
Well,
He was
yeah.
hoping Corinne would fall into his arms and
Yeah.
weep and mourn the loss of her husband.
Any other thoughts?
Well, one thing, I don't think Jesse or Cal or anybody else had gone to the care facility the Ark was in, to see how awful it
Yes.
really was.
And was it real? Was it a real place or a?
Oh, no, well, we did some research, obviously, on the type of facilities and the fact that they often house the sick with the insane in those days. But it was, based partly on our own experiences of
It was a sort of authentic without being necessarily a specific place. And, but again, you do play things up a little bit, for the story. But as Miriam says, I mean, they definitely did put people with physical ailments in the same kind of ward.
And definitely mentally ill people have always been misplaced until just very recently. I don't think we've really dealt with that well.
Well, even children with Down syndrome, when they were born, they were institutionalized almost immediately. Yeah, I'm just thinking, Corinne had been to that place. She had seen how he was
awful it
taken
was.
care of,
Yeah.
and she knew she could do a better job. It would be hard, it would be difficult, and she wouldn't have much joy or happiness outside of that, but at least she'd be taking care of her husband.
That's a good point about they haven't seen it. So
Yeah.
that's a really good point.
I think it's interesting too how like we can't force anybody, like like everybody has their own choices to make and we can't force them. And it's interesting sometimes how like when you try to force someone, you end up at the exact place you don't want to be. Because Jessie was trying to keep Corin from, helping Ark take his own life. And then that was the thing that she was like, I cannot send you back there and like this is your choice and I'll help you because I love you.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's hard. Like making decisions from like fear and scarcity is never a good thing. Like it's never good, when you're making those decisions because you're afraid of what's going to work.
Yeah, but it's so interesting how she forced her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was kind of the thing that put her over the top, that she's like, I can't send you back there because it's horrible.
And even at that, when it came to actually handing him the seeds,
Yeah,
that you
it's
did
so
a good
hard.
job on saying how hard that was for her. That was so poignant, I thought.
Oh, but you didn't just have the right to decide his own fate.
Yeah, but like even today, we would have to go to Oregon.
Yeah.
We don't have a choice to make that decision in Utah.
Other than it's not used, the resuscitation, things like that.
Yeah.
You really don't have a choice.
Quit eating.
Well, you
I
can,
can't.
No, I can't either.
That's a long,
but it's really a hard process.
It is.
I mean, I just think, a person when they are in the position Ark was in, or someone that is in so much physical pain that it's absolutely impossible to go on. I think they should have a choice,
I do too.
but,
I thought Ark's perspective was so interesting because he lots of times, that's gotta be horrible, like how he had to live after that. But he didn't like complain. He was just like, I'm just ready for the next part of my journey. I just thought that was so interesting. That he's like, I'm ready to go to the stars. It wasn't like I'm miserable. He
He
felt
didn't
like very
want out per
positive.
se. He
Yeah.
wanted to move on.
Yeah.
Was chewing on him.
That was actually very important in writing about Ark's perception. It had to be a positive perception, not a negative one. So I'm glad that you liked it because we were very keen that he had a positive vision.
Kind of made you like, I'm very pro-choice, but like it really got you on his side. You did an excellent job of writing that because you're just like, yep, he just wants to move on.
Okay, good.
Yeah, well, we kind of liked, as we put our hands on, we said, who do you like best? And you said Ark, and we said we did too. Because, I kind of like his philosophy. I'm sort of hanging on to it myself, actually. So.
There you go, exactly. I'm like, I might adopt some of this.
Although, I don't know if I could support a law in Utah about it, because if my kids were feeling I was a burden, I
Oh,
would,
but it would be your choice.
I know, but
But
I
that's
still
fair.
would not want to be a burden. And I just feel like I might take my life so I wasn't a burden to them. And I think that's kind of a scary thing, you know, I'm not saying that because of me. I think there are a lot of older people that would go, my children don't want me around. I guess I'd better take my life. And to me, I agree that, you know, you're in pain and you get the choice, but I think there is another side to it. So,
I just worry about people using it and then coercing someone
Right.
into doing it too.
right.
Because they just want mom or dad to just finally kick the buckets. They
Don't we try to prevent suicide?
Right.
I didn't think,
Well, and I
Gosh,
think things,
I didn't believe you should take your life.
and that was totally Jesse's opinion. I mean, that's, from a religious point of view, that's what Jesse believed. And I think maybe there's some
And I guess I
shifting
believe
of the
that we
sands,
cannot believe
maybe.
you should take
Yeah.
And what about people who are just clinically depressed? It's another option, but do we let them die or do we try to get them help so they can live?
Yeah.
I think too, like people, like sometimes you don't realize like that person's impact on other people too. You know, like, I don't know, it's one of those very hard.
It's a very hard, it's
You
a
have to
really
say yes
hard
or
topic.
no. Yeah.
And I think, don't you, that one of the themes of the book was being trapped versus having choices. There were so many different ways of being trapped in this book. I mean, one was in a small town. Dottie needed to get out of that town thinking her life would be different. Yiska was trapped by his culture. Rock Hudson was trapped by his homosexuality. There were just so many people that were trapped in different ways. And then did they have a choice to get out of that prison that they had? And how could they do it? Were there better ways to do it than others? I thought that it covered, that was part of the fun of the book, I think, was that it,
They needed a library so they could go and read books to uplift their life.
Yeah.
There you go, that's what they needed.
between holding your knees together in the library, that would take care of it all.
Yeah, and little towns still don't always have one.
Right.
I mean, they don't always have a library, so.
Did you in any way see it though, rather than people escaping from being trapped, as the characters, the people in the book, searching for freedom, which is a more positive orientation?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, it's the same
It's the
idea,
same idea.
but they were trying to escape from something, and they were searching for different kinds of freedom, definitely, yeah.
Well, like I said, I was really mad at you when Dottie got her opportunity to go to California and then she got raped and it just threw me off a cliff. And I thought, if you don't let Yiska get out of there, I'm gonna be a
Yes. But that was a brilliant way for him to just escape.
So good.
And
Well,
it should be softening a bit.
Dottie had to have a motivation to reveal where Yiska was. Sorry.
Yeah, but no, we had to let her get away, yeah, definitely. We weren't going to keep her in.
Yeah.
No, she was going to end up happy. And,
Yeah.
and Yiska, what did you think of Yiska's escape?
That was.
It was brilliant, yeah.
Yeah, that was really.
Because when he said he was gonna walk from there, it's like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? I can't even stand to drive there. It feels like it goes on and on and on and on. And I was so glad that there was a way for him to get out.
Yeah.
Without standing out.
And you got the feeling, and I don't know, you know, if the federal troops would still go after him, but the sheriff wasn't going to. You got the feeling he was.
He sort of knew he was wrong.
Yeah, he was atoning. I mean, I felt like he was atoning, and Cal atoned, and then maybe, because I wrote down as I was reading the book, can you ever go back home? And I thought he can. He'll get caught down there, but then you made it so, yeah, maybe he can, and maybe they won't come after him, and that was nice. Yes.
Yeah, well, we hope we had a feeling that things ended positively for the people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It may not have been it was implied rather than stated.
Well, let's just end with this question. Oh, it's time. Maybe we don't have time. Yiska said, bitterness destroys you. And he, maybe of all the characters, he had the most reason to be bitter.
Yes.
He's thrown into prison for nothing and getting charged with murder. Any thoughts about that? I just love that line.
Yeah.
Did you want to say anything about it?
But I think that's true, because if you were really bitter, it wouldn't matter where you go, you're still gonna be trapped. And he really understood that you just have to make the best of the situation, which he had done all those years in prison. And then, you know, he just wanted to go home.
He was an awesome character.
He was. He was really awesome. And I'm glad he didn't take the seeds, that he got to go home, and I'm hoping his mom was there.
She was,
Yeah,
she was
yeah.
there.
Do you have any final words that you'd like to say before we end this?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for paying such attention to this story and reading it in such detail. I mean, that's really very flattering for us to find out. So, and we're glad very much to hear that you enjoyed it. And since you seem to have enjoyed it, it will be very, very helpful to us if you could give the book a rating on Amazon or a rating on Goodreads and tell your friends about it. You know, word of mouth does a terrific help for selling books, and we'd love more people to read the story. So anything you can do to help on the ratings front or the word of mouth front, we'd be very grateful for.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. So nice to have you here. I'm sorry,
Yes.
Richard, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just saying it's very gratifying for us to actually see real and talk to real live readers, because
Yes.
well, when you write a book, you know,
And we are, in real life.
you write it in isolation, and then you're typically in contact with sort of literary agents or publishers. And by the time the book gets to a reader, you've sort of lost track of or lost contact with the reader. So we very much appreciate the fact you've taken an interest, and we love talking to you rather than you talking to us.
Yeah, you know, it was a very interesting evening for us. Thank you.
It was fun to have you as part of the circle.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting us. Very kind of you.
All right.
Thank you very much.